I still remember the day I first stepped into the Kingston mansion. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors, chandeliers glistened overhead, and every corner smelled faintly of expensive perfume and loneliness. I was there not as a guest, but as the janitor. My name is Elena, a single mother trying to survive on minimum wage, working night shifts and praying my little girl, Mia, would never see how tired I truly was. The mansion belonged to Ethan Kingston, a man whose face appeared in magazines and business journals, known for his billion-dollar empire, and, more recently, for being the widowed father of twin daughters. The girls, barely 2 years old, had driven away 6 nannies in the last 4 months. Rumors spread among the staff that the twins were cursed. Impossible to handle, screaming for hours, throwing tantrums, rejecting every caretaker who tried to comfort them. I didn't believe in curses. But when I heard their cries echoing down the long hall that morning, my heart clenched. "Don't even think about going near them," whispered Marla, the head maid, as I passed with my cleaning cart. "They bite. And Mr. Kingston doesn't like anyone interfering." I just nodded, pretending not to care, though my motherly instincts were already stirring. Later that evening, as I mopped near the nursery door, I heard it again, 2 small voices crying in pain and fear. I froze, hand tightening on the mop. No one else moved. The nannies had already quit. The mansion staff had learned to ignore it, but I couldn't. Quietly, I pushed open the door. The nursery was dimly lit, toys scattered across the floor, and 2 little girls, Ava and Lila, sat in the middle, tears streaking down their tiny cheeks. Their matching red dresses were wrinkled, their teddy bear tossed aside. I dropped the mop and slowly knelt down, speaking softly. Hey, shh, it's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." They looked at me with wide blue eyes, confused, trembling. No one had spoken to them like that in weeks. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a small hand puppet I used to make Mia laugh. "Look who came to say hi," I whispered, wiggling the puppet. "Mr. Bear says you look brave." To my surprise, one of them, Ava, I think, stopped crying. Lila sniffled, her little hand reaching for the puppet. I smiled and let her hold it. That's when the door burst open. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" The deep voice froze me in place. Standing in the doorway was Ethan Kingston himself, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp gray suit. His expression was a mix of anger and disbelief. I scrambled to my feet, stammering, I'm sorry, sir. They were crying. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on his daughters, both now silent, resting against my arms, their tiny heads on my shoulder. For a moment, the mighty Ethan Kingston, the man who controlled empires, looked utterly lost. How did you do that?" he asked softly, as if afraid to break the moment. I didn't have an answer. Maybe because I wasn't just a janitor. I was a mother who knew what it felt like to hold a child who only needed love. For days after that unexpected encounter, the mansion buzzed with quiet gossip. The janitor who had calmed the twins, something no trained nanny, therapist, or child expert had managed, had become the subject of whispers in the hallways. But for me, nothing had changed. I still scrubbed marble floors, polished glass tables, and kept my head down. At least I tried to, because ever since that evening, Ethan Kingston had been watching me. It wasn't in a threatening way, but with the puzzled curiosity of a man who couldn't understand what he'd seen. A few times I'd catch him pausing near the nursery door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me as I gently played with the twins. Sometimes he'd start to say something, then stop and leave. One afternoon, Marla rushed into the staff kitchen, breathless. "Elena, Mr. Kingston wants to see you. In his office, now." My stomach dropped. No janitor ever got summoned to the office, unless it meant trouble. When I entered, the office was grand, lined with glass walls and a panoramic view of the city skyline. Ethan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his usual air of power replaced by something quieter. "I've been told," he began, his voice steady but uncertain, "that you've been helping with Ava and Lila." I nodded, keeping my gaze down. "I only comforted them, sir. They were crying and no one came." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't understand. They haven't let anyone touch them since their mother passed. Every time someone tries, they scream. But with you?" He paused, as if even saying it felt strange. "They sleep." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of the city below. "Are you trained with children?" he asked. "No," I said quietly. "Just experience. I have a daughter of my own." He looked at me then, really looked, for the first time not as a janitor but as a woman who had something he'd lost. Tenderness. "Would you consider taking care of them, officially, as their nanny?" I froze. The offer was impossible. A janitor turned nanny to a billionaire's daughters? I wanted to refuse, to protect myself from whatever storm that job might bring. But before I could answer, a small voice interrupted. "Mommy?" It was Ava, toddling into the office in her tiny red dress, clutching her teddy bear. She wasn't calling me her real mother, but the word still stabbed through me. Ethan's expression softened, shock melting into quiet awe. Ava ran straight into my arms. "I think," Ethan said slowly, voice filled with something between hope and surrender, "you've already been chosen." That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, Mia asleep beside me. I thought of the offer, of those two fragile little souls, of Ethan's eyes when he saw them calm. I knew accepting meant stepping into a world where I didn't belong, a world of wealth, pain, and secrets buried beneath marble and glass. But deep inside, something whispered that this was fate. And by morning, I had made my decision. The next morning, when I stepped into the Kingston mansion, it felt different. The air wasn't heavy with tension anymore. It carried a strange calm, fragile but real. I had accepted Ethan's offer. I was no longer just the janitor. I was now the caretaker of Ava and Lila Kingston, the daughters no one could handle. Marla's eyes widened when she saw me in the nursery wearing a clean uniform instead of the yellow gloves. "You? The new nanny?" she whispered, disbelief dripping from her voice. I smiled faintly. "Looks like it." She shook her head. "Good luck, Elena. You'll need it." But luck had nothing to do with it. What those little girls needed wasn't money or luxury. It was warmth, patience, and someone who listened. The first few days were quiet miracles. Ava and Lila began eating properly again. They started to laugh, soft, musical giggles that filled the cold mansion with life. I'd sing lullabies, tell them stories about Mr. Bear's adventures, and sometimes let them nap on my lap. Ethan would stand silently at the door, watching, as if afraid to interrupt the peace he hadn't seen in years. One evening, while putting the twins to bed, I noticed something. A small framed photo on the nightstand. A beautiful woman, smiling brightly, her arms around the girls as newborns. Ethan's late wife. Her eyes looked kind and familiar. Later that night, I found Ethan in the living room, a drink in his hand, staring blankly at the city lights through the tall windows. For a moment, he looked nothing like a millionaire, just a broken man trying to remember how to breathe. "She was beautiful," I said softly. He turned, startled that I was there. "You saw the photo?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he interrupted gently, then looked away. "Her name was Clara. She was everything good this world had. After she passed during childbirth, I couldn't even look at the twins without remembering her. I tried to love them, I did, but every time they cried, I froze. His voice cracked. The ice-cold billionaire was gone, replaced by a grieving husband, a lost father. They needed me, he continued, but all I could give them was distance. I sat quietly beside him. They don't need perfection, Ethan. They just need presence. They already forgive you. Children always do. He stared at me for a long time, and for the first time his expression softened, like he saw not a janitor but someone who understood his pain. Just then, a faint cry echoed from upstairs, one of the twins having a nightmare. I stood up immediately, but Ethan stopped me. "I'll go," he said. His words carried a kind of courage that only comes when someone decides to heal. We walked together to the nursery. Ava was whimpering, clutching her blanket. Ethan hesitated at the door, then knelt beside her crib. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, voice trembling. "Daddy's here." Ava blinked, her tiny hand reaching for him. And for the first time in 2 years, Ethan Kingston held his daughter. She stopped crying instantly, resting against his chest. I turned away, my heart full. The impossible was already happening, not because of me, but because love had finally found its way back into this home. A few weeks passed, and the Kingston mansion no longer felt like a museum of grief. It felt alive. Ava and Lila's laughter echoed through the halls. The once silent rooms now glowed with warmth and play. Even the staff, once cautious and cold, began to smile again. And Ethan, the man who once hid behind work and silence, had begun to change. He joined us for breakfast, read bedtime stories with me, and even learned how to braid his daughter's hair, though his attempts were adorably crooked. Watching him like that made something unfamiliar stir in my chest. I tried to ignore it. He was my employer, and I was just the janitor turned nanny. But every time our eyes met across the dinner table, I felt the weight of something unspoken building between us. One rainy evening, while the twins slept, I sat in the nursery's rocking chair, humming softly. The rain tapped against the window pane, and the golden light from the lamp cast a warm glow over the room. I almost didn't hear Ethan's footsteps behind me. "They sleep faster when you sing," he said, his voice low and calm. I turned and smiled. "It's a trick I learned when Mia was a baby. Works every time." He chuckled, sitting on the nearby couch. "You've done more for them in 1 month than anyone in years. I don't even know how to thank you." "You already have," I said gently. "You're trying. That's all they ever wanted." For a moment, silence stretched between us, not awkward but full of meaning. Then he looked at me curiously, eyes narrowing slightly. "Elena, have we met before? There's something about you I can't place." The question caught me off guard. My heart skipped. I hesitated before answering. "No, sir, not that I know of," but the truth was more complicated than I wanted to admit. Later that night, unable to sleep, I pulled out an old photograph from my purse. A faded picture of me in a hospital room, holding Mia as a newborn. In the corner of the photo stood Clara Kingston, smiling softly. She had been my nurse and my friend. I had promised her that if anything ever happened to her, I would find a way to make sure her babies were loved. And somehow, fate had brought me right to them. The next morning, the truth came out unexpectedly. I was helping Lila color when Ethan walked in, holding an old hospital file. His expression was unreadable. "You knew Clara?" he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I froze. "Yes, I did." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it didn't matter who I was. What mattered were your daughters. Clara. She made me promise to protect them if anything ever happened." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes glassy. "She told you that?" I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "The night before she gave birth, she said she was scared. Not for herself, but for you and the girls. She said you'd forget how to smile. She made me promise that if I ever saw her family in pain, I'd help them find light again. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he crossed the room and took my hands in his. "You've done more than that, Elena," he whispered. "You didn't just bring light, you brought life back to all of us." The twins, sensing the quiet emotion in the room, ran up and wrapped their tiny arms around our legs. Ethan knelt, pulling them close, his gaze meeting mine with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. Something that didn't need words. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling golden light across the room, touching all four of us like a promise kept. For the first time in years, Ethan Kingston smiled, a real, unguarded smile. And I realized maybe the impossible had already happened, not just for his daughters, but for both of us.